The hunter's prize. The humid air of Nexus 7 clung to Soren Nash's skin as he crept through the bioluminescent undergrowth. Sweat trickled down his neck, making the environmental suit uncomfortable despite its advanced cooling system. The jungle pulsed with alien life, floating spores that glowed like starfire, twisted vines that seemed to reach for him with every step, and creatures that sang in frequencies that made his teeth ache. His scanner beeped softly, indicating another deposit of quantum crystals nearby. These rare minerals were worth a fortune back on Earth, enough to fund his real mission, finding out what happened to the lost colony on the planet's dark side. But first, he needed resources. The crystal formation jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, its surface reflecting the purple light of the twin moons overhead. Soren knelt beside it, pulling out his extraction tools with practiced precision. One wrong move and the crystal's unstable matrix would shatter, leaving him with nothing but dangerous shards and wasted time. He didn't hear her approach. There was no rustle of leaves, no snap of twigs, just the sudden press of something sharp against his throat. Soren froze, his hand still gripping the extraction tool. "Move and die, little prey," a voice purred behind him, smooth as silk but edged with steel. The language translator in his suit crackled to life, converting her alien tongue to English. Soren swallowed carefully, feeling the blade's kiss against his skin. "I mean no harm," he said slowly. "I'm just a prospector." A low laugh answered him, rich and dangerous. "You humans always say that. Always lying, always taking." The blade withdrew slightly, allowing him to turn. His breath caught in his throat as he saw her for the first time. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body a masterpiece of lethal grace. Her skin was the color of twilight, marked with bioluminescent patterns that shifted like clouds across a night sky. But it was her eyes that held him, golden orbs with vertical pupils that seemed to peer straight into his soul. "I'm not lying," he managed, trying to keep his voice steady despite the way his heart hammered against his ribs. "My name is Soren Nash. I'm collecting crystals to fund a search mission." The warrior, for she could be nothing else in that sleek armor that seemed to grow from her very flesh, tilted her head. "I am Nyara, hunter of the 7th house," she said, her voice carrying both pride and warning. "And you, Soren Nash, are trespassing in sacred hunting grounds." He noticed then that her blade wasn't metal but some sort of crystalline material that hummed with its own inner light. The same technology that had eluded human understanding for centuries was as natural to her as breathing. "I didn't know," he said truthfully. There were no markers, no warnings. Nyara's lips curved in what might have been amusement or contempt. "We do not need markers. Those who belong here know. Those who don't." She let the threat hang in the air between them. Soren's mind raced. He'd heard stories of the Zenthians, the native species of Nexus 7, but all official reports claimed they were reclusive, avoiding contact with humans. Yet here was one, holding him at blade point with an expertise that spoke of countless hunts. "What happens now?" he asked, trying to ignore how the moonlight played across her iridescent skin, how her presence seemed to fill the clearing with an electric tension. Nyara studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes unblinking. "Now, little prey," she said, and this time there was definitely amusement in her voice, "you come with me. The elders will want to know why a human dares to hunt alone in our sacred grounds." She gestured with her blade, indicating he should stand. As Soren rose, he noticed how her gaze tracked his movements with predatory intensity. There was something in that look beyond simple threat assessment, a spark of curiosity, perhaps even attraction. "And if I refuse?" he asked, testing the waters. Nyara's patterns flared briefly, casting dancing shadows across the jungle floor. "Then I hunt you properly," she said, her voice dropping to a throaty purr that sent shivers down his spine. "And I never lose my prey." Soren felt a smile tugging at his lips despite the danger. There was something intoxicating about her, the way she moved, the power contained in her tall frame, the intelligence that sparkled behind those alien eyes. "Lead the way," he said, making a small bow that wasn't entirely mocking. As she guided him deeper into the jungle, Soren couldn't help but notice how she kept close, her movements fluid and graceful despite her size. Every now and then, her patterns would pulse in response to something he couldn't sense, turning her skin into a canvas of living light. The deeper they went, the more the forest changed. The plants grew larger, more ancient, their bioluminescence forming complex patterns that seemed to respond to Nyara's presence. Soren realized with growing amazement that this wasn't just a jungle, it was a carefully maintained ecosystem, as much a technology as any human machine. "Your world is beautiful," he said softly, genuine awe in his voice. Nyara glanced back at him, surprise flickering across her features. "Most humans see only resources to be taken," she said, her tone thoughtful. "You see differently." "I'm not most humans," Soren replied, meeting her gaze steadily. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, or the seed of understanding. Then Nyara's head snapped up, her patterns flaring in alarm. "Down," she hissed, shoving him roughly behind a massive root. Soren barely had time to register the movement before something large and deadly sailed through the space where he'd been standing. The jungle erupted into chaos, and he realized with sudden clarity that he wasn't the only one being hunted tonight. The story continues with their growing attraction amidst danger, cultural clashes, and the mysteries of Nexus 7. Dangerous desires. The predator's roar shook the canopy above them, sending cascades of bioluminescent spores raining down like falling stars. Nyara's body pressed against Soren's, pinning him to the massive tree root as another volley of toxic spines whistled past. Her skin pulsed with warning patterns, casting a faint purple glow across his face. "Nexus Stalker," she breathed, her lips close to his ear. "They hunt in pairs." Soren tried to focus on the danger rather than the intoxicating warmth of her body or the way her alien scent made his head swim. "What's the plan?" he whispered, acutely aware of how her patterns seemed to respond to his proximity, rippling in mesmerizing waves. Nyara's golden eyes locked with his, and for a moment, the hunger in them had nothing to do with combat. "We run," she said, her voice husky. Unless. A dangerous smile curved her lips. "Unless you trust me enough to fight alongside me, little prey." Before Soren could respond, she rolled away from him, her crystalline blade singing as she drew it in one fluid motion. The stalker burst from the undergrowth, a nightmare of chitinous armor and venomous spines. Nyara met it with lethal grace, her patterns flaring bright enough to momentarily blind the creature. Soren didn't hesitate. He drew his mining laser, recalibrating it to combat settings. "Left side," he called out, noting a gap in the creature's natural armor. Nyara moved instantly, understanding his intent without further explanation. She drove the beast right, creating the perfect angle for Soren's shot. The laser burst caught the stalker in its vulnerable spot, and the monster screamed in pain and rage. "The second one will be circling behind," Nyara warned, her blade weaving patterns of light that kept the injured stalker at bay. "They mate for life. Where one strikes, the other follows," Soren finished, already moving to cover her blind spot. They worked in perfect synchronization, as if they'd fought together for years instead of minutes. The second stalker attacked from above, dropping from the canopy with deadly precision. But they were ready. Nyara's blade caught the moonlight, leaving trails of luminescence as she severed one of its hunting limbs. Soren's laser found another weak spot, and the creature retreated with an agonized shriek, its mate following close behind. In the sudden quiet, Soren became intensely aware of his ragged breathing and pounding heart. Nyara stood barely a foot away, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her patterns pulsing with combat energy. A thin line of phosphorescent blood trickled from a cut on her arm. "You're hurt," he said, stepping closer. Nyara's eyes dilated as he approached, but she didn't move away. "A scratch," she dismissed, though her patterns betrayed her pain with flickering disruptions. Soren reached into his pack, pulling out a medical kit. "Let me," he said softly. To his surprise, she allowed it, watching with curiosity as he cleaned and dressed the wound. "Your touch," she murmured, her patterns shifting to something softer, more intimate. "It is, not unpleasant." Soren smiled, his fingers lingering perhaps longer than necessary on her arm. "High praise from a hunter." "You fought well," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Most humans would have panicked, tried to run. But you." She reached out, tracing a finger along his jaw. "You have a warrior's heart." The touch sent electricity through his body. "Does this mean you're not taking me to the elders?" Nyara's expression grew complex. "The situation has changed. Those stalkers were driven from their territory. Something is wrong in the deep jungle." She paused, studying him intently. "And you are not what I expected. Is that good or bad?" Her patterns rippled with what might have been amusement. "We shall see." She turned, gesturing for him to follow. "Come. My sanctuary is near. We can rest there, plan our next move." As they moved through the jungle, Soren noticed a change in their dynamic. Nyara no longer treated him purely as a captive. Her movements were more relaxed, and occasionally she would point out fascinating aspects of her world, plants that sang to the moons, creatures that wove light into living art. The sanctuary, when they reached it, took his breath away. It was a massive hollow tree, its interior glowing with the same bioluminescent patterns that marked Nyara's skin. Living architecture flowed like water, creating spaces that seemed to defy gravity. "It's beautiful," Soren said honestly, watching as Nyara's patterns synchronized with the ambient light. "It is home," she replied simply, but her expression softened as she watched him take it all in. "Few outsiders have ever seen this place. Why show me?" Nyara moved closer, her height forcing him to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. "Because you see beauty where others see only resources to exploit. Because you fight with honor." Her patterns shifted to deep blues and purples. "Because you make me feel things I should not feel for prey." The air between them grew thick with tension. Soren's heart raced as she leaned down, her alien features somehow becoming the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Their faces were inches apart when a distant explosion shattered the moment. Nyara's patterns flared in alarm. "The human mining colony," she said, her voice tight with concern. "That came from their direction." Soren's blood ran cold. "The lost colony? I thought it was abandoned." "Not abandoned," Nyara corrected grimly. "Taken. And now I fear I know what drove those stalkers from their hunting grounds." She met his gaze, her expression fierce. "Will you fight with me again, Soren Nash?" He reached out, daringly tracing one of her luminescent patterns with his finger. The gasp this drew from her sent heat through his body. "Try to stop me," he said. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, both knew their fates were now irrevocably intertwined. Whatever awaited them in the deep jungle would face them not as hunter and prey, but as equals, bound by something neither fully understood but both increasingly craved. Forbidden territory. The deep jungle of Nexus 7 grew darker as Soren and Nyara pushed toward the source of the explosion. Here, even the bioluminescent flora seemed subdued, their light dimming as if in fear. Nyara's patterns had shifted to deep crimson, a warning sign, Soren had learned, indicating both danger and arousal in her species. "The sacred grounds lie ahead," she whispered, her golden eyes piercing the darkness. "No outsider has ever walked these paths." Soren watched as she moved through the undergrowth, her movements liquid grace despite her impressive height. "Yet you're bringing me here." She turned to him, her patterns rippling with complex emotions. "You ceased being merely an outsider when you fought beside me." Her hand brushed his shoulder, sending sparks of electricity through his body. "When you touched me with gentleness instead of fear." The air between them grew thick with unspoken desires, but a distant scream shattered the moment. It wasn't human or Zenthian, something altogether more alien and terrifying. Below, Nyara hissed, pulling Soren into a natural cavern formed by massive tree roots. Her body pressed against his in the tight space, her skin's patterns casting a soft glow across his features. "They're hunting." "Who's hunting?" Soren whispered, trying to focus on the danger rather than the intoxicating sensation of her body against his. "The Void Walkers," she breathed, her lips close to his ear. "Ancient enemies of both our peoples. We thought them extinct, but they've returned, using the human colony as bait." Her scent surrounded him, alien yet increasingly familiar, making his head swim with desire. "The lost colony, they're still alive." "Some." Nyara's patterns shifted to deep purple, reflecting grief. "The Void Walkers don't kill their prey immediately. They transform them." Soren's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining naturally despite their alien differences. "We'll save who we can," he promised. Nyara's free hand cupped his face, her touch sending shivers down his spine. "You are unlike any human I've known," she murmured. "Your spirit burns as bright as any warrior of my people." Their faces drew closer, the tension between them becoming unbearable. Just before their lips met, the ground trembled beneath them. Something massive was moving through the jungle. They pressed deeper into the cavern, and Soren felt Nyara's patterns sync with his heartbeat, a sign of deep emotional connection among her people. Through gaps in the roots, they watched as shadows moved through the jungle, tall, skeletal figures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "The sacred grounds house a weapon," Nyara whispered, her breath hot against his neck. "One that could drive them back. But reaching it will be suicide." Soren finished, managing a wry smile. "Perhaps." Her patterns flickered with amusement despite the danger. "But you make me want to take risks," Soren gnashed. They waited until the shadows passed, then emerged into the altered landscape. The jungle had changed, becoming more geometric, with structures that seemed grown rather than built. Ancient Zenthian script glowed faintly on bark and stone. "My ancestors built this place," Nyara explained as they moved carefully through the ruins. "They bound their essence to the land itself, creating weapons that could fight the darkness between stars." Soren studied the alien architecture with wonder. "And your people still guard it, after all this time?" "We guard, we wait, we remember." She paused, turning to face him. "But sometimes waiting brings unexpected gifts." Her patterns shifted to deep blue, a color he'd never seen on her before. "Sometimes the enemy of our ancestors becomes." "Becomes what?" he asked, his heart racing as she stepped closer. Instead of answering, Nyara pulled him into a shadowed alcove, her tall frame pressing him against the ancient wall. Her patterns pulsed with desire, matching the thunder of his pulse. "Among my people," she whispered, "warriors often bond before battle. It strengthens their connection, their ability to fight as one." Soren's hands found her waist, feeling the smooth texture of her skin, watching in fascination as his touch made her patterns swirl and dance. "Is that what this is? Battle preparation?" She laughed softly, the sound making his body tingle. "No," she admitted, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. "This is something else entirely." Their first kiss was electric, alien yet perfect. Her lips were softer than he expected, and where they touched, her pattern spread to his skin like living light. He felt her strength, her passion, the careful restraint as she held him with hands that could easily crush him. When they finally parted, both breathless, her patterns had shifted to colors he'd never seen before, beautiful and profound. But before either could speak, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the ruins. "They found us," Nyara said, her warrior's instincts taking over even as her patterns still showed traces of their passion. "The weapon chamber lies ahead, but we'll have to fight our way there." Soren drew his mining laser, modified now for combat thanks to Nyara's technological insights. Together. She smiled, fierce and beautiful, drawing her crystalline blade. Together, my unexpected love. They moved as one into the ancient chamber, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. But now they fought not just for survival, but for something more precious, a future neither had imagined possible until this night. Hearts of light and shadow. The ancient chamber pulsed with living energy as Soren and Nyara raced through its crystalline corridors. Their footsteps echoed off walls that seemed to breathe, patterns of light chasing their movements like ripples in a luminescent pool. Behind them, the howls of the Void Walkers grew closer. The weapon chamber lies beyond that archway, Nyara said, her golden eyes glowing fiercely in the dim light. Her patterns had shifted to a deep crimson, reflecting both battle readiness and her lingering desire from their earlier embrace. But the path is protected by ancient trials. Soren checked his modified laser's charge, acutely aware of how her tall frame moved protectively closer to him. Let me guess, deadly ones. Her laugh was rich and warm despite their dire situation. Would you expect anything less from my people? She paused, turning to face him. Soren, if we don't survive this. He pulled her down into a fierce kiss, cutting off her words. Her patterns flared brilliantly, spreading to his skin where they touched. When they parted, both breathless, he smiled. Save it for after we win. The first trial chamber opened before them, its floor a maze of floating platforms suspended over a bottomless void. Geometric patterns danced across each surface, shifting and changing like living mathematics. The platforms respond to harmonized biorhythms, Nyara explained, her hand finding his. We must cross together, our patterns aligned, or fall. Soren interlaced his fingers with hers, feeling the way her alien pulse synchronized with his heartbeat. Like everything else we've done, as one. They moved across the chamber in perfect unity, each step a dance of trust and precision. Where their joined hands touched, Nyara's patterns spread between them, creating a bridge of living light. Behind them, the Void Walkers' shadows began seeping under the chamber doors. The second trial brought walls of energy that threatened to tear them apart, but they held fast to each other, their combined strength creating a path through the impossible. The third chamber tested their minds, projecting their deepest fears into reality. Soren saw Nyara lying broken, her patterns dark and lifeless. She witnessed him transformed into a Void Walker, his humanity erased. But their shared touch anchored them to truth, their growing bond stronger than any illusion. Finally, they reached the weapon chamber. Ancient technology beyond human understanding filled the vast space, centered around a crystalline spire that reached toward the distant ceiling. But they weren't alone. Impressive, a voice like grinding glass spoke from the shadows. A figure emerged, humanoid but wrong, its form seeming to bend light around it. Love between species. How quaint. More Void Walkers materialized from the darkness, their bodies moving in ways that hurt the eyes to watch. Their leader, taller than even Nyara, fixed them with eyes that seemed to swallow light. Your ancestors imprisoned us, it continued, sealed us away between dimensions. But humans, wonderful, reckless humans, broke those seals with their mining. And now both your races will feed our evolution. Nyara's blade hummed to life, its crystal edge gleaming. You will not have him, she snarled, her patterns blazing with protective fury. Or my world. The Void Walker's laugh sent chills down Soren's spine. Bold words from a species facing extinction. Show them, my children. From the shadows emerged twisted forms, corrupted humans and Zenthians, their bodies partially transformed by Void Walker influence. Among them, Soren spotted familiar faces from the lost colony. The weapon, he whispered to Nyara. How do we activate it? Her patterns pulsed with determination. It requires both bloodlines now, Zenthian and human. A fusion of energies. She met his eyes. A bridge between worlds. Understanding dawned. Their connection, their ability to share patterns, wasn't just compatibility, it was the key. As the Void Walkers attacked, Soren and Nyara moved as one toward the crystal spire. The battle became chaos. Nyara's blade sang through the air, keeping corrupted attackers at bay while Soren's laser cut precise paths through their ranks. They fought back to back, then side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized. When they reached the spire, Nyara's free hand found his. Together, she breathed, her pattern starting to spread between them. "Let me in completely." Soren opened himself to her alien consciousness as they pressed their joined hands to the crystal. Energy surged through them, transforming Nyara's patterns into pure light that spread across his skin. Their minds merged, human and Zenthian becoming something new, something powerful. The spire responded, unleashing waves of purifying energy that swept through the chamber. The Void Walkers screamed as dimensional forces tore at their corrupted forms. Their leader lunged for the joined lovers, but the light pouring from their unified forms held it at bay. "Impossible," it howled as its body began to dissolve. "We are eternal." "Love is eternal," Nyara corrected, her voice harmonizing with Soren's as they spoke as one. "And we are its champions." The chamber filled with blinding light as the weapon reached full power. When it faded, the Void Walkers were gone, their corrupted victims restored to their original forms. But neither Soren nor Nyara noticed immediately, they were lost in each other's eyes, their patterns still sharing the same impossible colors. "I never thought," Nyara whispered, touching his face where her pattern still glowed on his skin, "that I would find my soul's match in prey." Soren smiled, pulling her closer. "I'm not prey anymore," he reminded her. "I'm your equal. Your partner." "My love," she agreed, leaning down to capture his lips in a kiss that made their shared patterns explode with light. Around them, the ancient chamber hummed with renewed energy, and in the distance, dawn began to break over Nexus 7. A new day was rising, bringing with it a future neither of them had imagined possible, one where the boundaries between their species blurred, and love truly could conquer the darkness between stars. When two worlds merge. Dawn painted the skies of Nexus 7 in shades of violet and gold as Soren and Nyara emerged from the ancient chambers. Their pattern still flowed between them, a visible sign of their unprecedented bond. The rescued colonists followed behind, many still adjusting to their restoration from the Void Walkers' influence. "The elders will be arriving soon," Nyara said, her golden eyes reflecting the rising sun. Her tall frame moved closer to Soren, protective and possessive. They felt the weapon's activation across the planet. Soren reached up to trace one of the luminescent patterns that now decorated his skin, matching hers. "Will they approve of this?" he gestured between them, where their energies intermingled like dancing stars. Nyara's laugh was rich and deep. "They will have no choice. The ancient weapon responded to our bond. In all our history, no such thing has happened." Her patterns shifted to deep purple with swirls of gold, love and pride combined. "You and I have rewritten what is possible." The jungle around them seemed to pulse with renewed life. The bioluminescent flora glowed brighter, responding to their shared energy. Where they walked, plants turned toward them like flowers following the sun. "I never expected this when I came looking for quantum crystals," Soren mused, his free hand resting on the mining laser that had helped save both their peoples. "I thought I'd find resources, maybe answers about the lost colony. Instead, you found me," Nyara finished, pulling him into a shadowed grove. Her tall frame bent down gracefully as she pressed him against a massive tree trunk. "And I found my prey becoming my mate." Their kiss was electric, sending ripples of light cascading through their shared patterns. Soren's hands traced the curves of her alien form while her strong fingers tangled in his hair. Where their skin touched, new patterns formed, unique to their union. A distant horn call broke them apart, the signal of approaching Zenthian elders. Nyara's patterns flickered with amusement at Soren's frustrated groan. "Soon, my love," she promised, her voice thick with desire. We have eternity ahead of us. The elders arrived in vessels of living crystal that descended from the morning clouds. They were ancient and imposing, their patterns complex with centuries of wisdom. But even they stopped in wonder at the sight of human and Zenthian sharing the same luminescent marks. The lead elder, her patterns a cascade of shifting wisdom, approached them. The weapon of our ancestors responds only to perfect harmony, she said, her voice carrying both authority and awe. You have achieved what we thought impossible. Soren stood tall beside Nyara, their hands clasped. Love makes the impossible possible, he said simply. The elder's patterns rippled with something like approval. Perhaps this is why the ancestors left the weapon as they did, waiting for our peoples to find common ground, to bridge the void between stars with understanding rather than conquest. Nyara stepped forward, her warrior's pride evident in every movement. The void walkers are banished, the colonies saved. Let this mark a new beginning between our peoples. The elder studied them both, her ancient eyes seeing more than just their physical forms. The patterns you share, they are permanent. Your energies have merged in ways we barely understand. Are you prepared for what this means? Soren looked up at Nyara, seeing in her golden eyes the same certainty he felt in his heart. I crossed galaxies to find her, he said. I'll cross dimensions to keep her. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in human or Zenthian history. Under the ancient trees of Nexus 7, two species were joined not just in alliance, but in love. The elders wove strands of living light around them, making official what their hearts had already decided. Nyara's patterns blazed with joy as she pulled Soren into a kiss that sealed their union, their shared light illuminating the jungle around them. The assembled colonists and Zenthians witnessed the birth of something new, a bridge between worlds built on trust, desire, and unshakable love. Later, in their private sanctuary high in the ancient trees, Soren traced the patterns that marked them both as one. So, mighty hunter, he teased, was it worth letting your prey escape? Nyara's patterns shifted to deep, passionate crimsons as she pulled him closer. Who says you escaped? She purred, her golden eyes gleaming with promise. I simply chose to keep you. Their laughter echoed through the luminescent canopy as they came together, two beings from different worlds who had found something rare and precious in each other's arms. Above them, the twin moons of Nexus 7 cast their light over a changed world, where the boundaries between species had blurred, and love had proven stronger than ancient prejudices. The jungle pulsed with life around their sanctuary, and in the distance, the ancient weapon chambers hummed with renewed purpose. But Soren and Nyara noticed none of it, lost in each other, their patterns dancing together in the eternal night of their private paradise. The end.